Do you know the difference between complex and complicated? It's small, but it's huge. And that is what we're going to talk about today in the MTOM podcast. I'm Paul Yeager. This is a production of Iowa PBS and the Market to Market TV show. Will Harris is a fourth generation cattleman from Georgia, the southwest part of the state, sixth generation farmer. Things have changed. It might not look as green as what's behind me or what you see in your area. He's evolved, he's adapted, he has changed things dramatically since he came into the farm in the 1970s. How things have evolved, how things have regenerated when it comes to agriculture in every sense of the word. We'll talk regeneration of the land and the organic matter. We'll also talk a lot about cattle. We're going to talk about the industry as a whole, what works for him. It is quite the operation that he has there, and the number of employees and what he does for himself. I think you're really going to like this conversation. Very easy to talk to Will Harris. White Oak Pastures is the name of his operation. I hope you enjoy. If you have feedback for me, send it in an email to paul.yeager@iowapbs.org. Now, let's get to Will. Well, first off, every cattleman, I've interviewed a couple of cattlemen over time who've gone to Congress and asked them about their hat. When do you take off the hat? Because, I mean, as a rancher, you've got expectations.
When I eat and when I go to bed.
What was your first hat? Who gave it to you? Do you remember?
This is an open road Stetson. It's what my dad wore and it's what my granddad wore. And when I was a little boy, when my dad, a hat barely lasted a year. And when he would discard it, I would get it and pack cotton around the inside and wear it. And I finally reached the elevation within the company that I could get my own new hat.
And does your hat now last a year?
It lasts more than a year. I don't work as hard as I used to.
You work differently and smarter. Let's go that way, Will.
I work differently, and I hope it's smarter. I've done a lot of work that was not very smart in my life.
Well, we'll discuss. We're not going to go through all of your life, but I do want to cover. You mentioned your generations there. First, tell me about Bluffton, Georgia. Where is that in the state? And as we sit here in the middle of 2026, what's the weather conditions like?
Bluffton, Georgia is in the bottom left corner, southwest Georgia. It's in Clay County, Georgia, and Clay County was the poorest county in America in 2020. That's on my website, that listing. We've improved a little bit, but still very, very impoverished, purely agrarian economy, and corn, cotton, peanuts primarily. Very little livestock, although I'm a livestock guy. It's a wonderful place to live. I love it. We've been able to, we probably couldn't have done what we have done had we not been in a place like Clay County. We've got 170 employees. We're the largest private employer in the state, in the county. And I've got wonderful, excellent employees. I pay them all I can, but I don't pay them all they're worth. And they could probably make more money if they were somewhere besides Clay County, Georgia, Bluffton, Georgia.
Well, what's the main thing that the employees do? What's some of the jobs?
Oh, we have, of course, we run the farm. We raise cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits, poultry, and vegetables. We have two slaughter plants, a red meat plant and a poultry plant. We have an order fulfillment center where we ship FedEx and UPS. We have a store, general store. We've got a restaurant, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. We got rental houses. We've bought a lot of houses through the years, and we rent them out to employees. But we also have a number of them that is for tourists that we rent by the night. There's a lot of moving parts here. We don't. If I have to hire someone to do something twice, I just go in that business. So we've got a carpenter crew, a fence building crew, landscaping crew, mechanic crew. We try to be quite independent in terms of hiring things done, and that's not just a personal preference. We're in this impoverished area where there's not a lot of commerce going on, it's hard to get things done unless you're doing it for yourself.
You sound like my friends in North Dakota. They also have that insulated, we do it all, we hire what we have because we know there isn't a store down the road that's going to come rescue us or go get that part. So, about your employees and your multi generations on this farm, at what are you through the 6 generations of the farm? Are you at the highest employment number that this farm's ever had right now?
We are. We are. It's we've I built these slaughter plants in the very early 2000s, and ever since then, the employee numbers gone up and up and up. I hope we're as big as we're ever going to be. I hope that.
Okay, well, let's take out the slaughter plants for a minute because I know that that number can get bigger. Would you still be the biggest employment number of the history of the farm too?
Yeah, out of the 160 employees, probably 30 of them in the slaughter plant.
Okay. All right. So slaughter plants. On our program, we often talk about the big four meat packers, and on the beef side of things, we try to talk about the independent, the small. Are you smaller than a small packer?
And I think we're very small. USDA has a definition. I'm not sure what it is off the top of my head. We slaughter a maximum of 30 head a day, 5 days a week. I'd say it averages between 25 and 30 head, 5 days a week on the cattle side. And that's the biggest part of what we do. We do slaughter hogs, sheep, goats, poultry, but the cattle are the big. I was a cattleman before I was anything else.
Hence the hat.
Here's the hat. Yes, sir.
Let's discuss then the economics of the slaughter plant right now. Are you enjoying the high prices of the market right now that all these others are, but also having the problem of the input is so high to get these cattle to where they need to be? Are you isolated from those economics, or are you wrapped up right in them?
I'm right in the middle of it. We have a little over 1,000 mama cows. And no, excuse me, we've got about 1,500 mama cows. And so we raise a lot of the calves ourselves, and we enjoy paying ourselves a high price for calves. The rest of them come from my producer group, and it's hard to pay them that much for cows. We have been able to go up on our beef, but not as much as I want to. Our business is profitable now, but it's very, very subtly profitable, very break-evenish right now. And that's okay. I've run this business when we lost money. I run it when we made money. I'd rather make money than lose money, but as long as we are able to keep our head above water, and we are, that.
What makes you different than a cattle producer, rancher, than someone in Oklahoma or Texas?
Well, I used to be. I was in Georgia, but I just raised calves. My great grandfather slaughtered animals on this farm like I do today, except it was before USDA, before electricity, before cooling, before internal combustion engines, and they peddled the meat in this little town of Bluffton. And they slaughter every day, 6 days a week. Before day, they'd get up, and the employees would get up, and they'd slaughter a cow or 2 or 3 hogs or 100 chickens or a few sheep or whatever it was. They made their business have something to slaughter. And my dad was born in 1920. He took over the farm post-World War II, and that was a game changer. And he rapidly evolved the farm into being just a cattle operation and just raising feeder calves that we raised, weaned, backgrounded, and shipped out west for finishing. And he was successful with that. He made money. I'm not saying he made a lot of money, but the business was profitable enough that we stayed in business. And I went to the University of Georgia. I majored in animal science, which had been animal husbandry at one point, but it was animal science. And I did the same thing my dad did for 20 years. I had cows and raised calves and sold them. But in the late 90s, I started selling beef instead of cows. And I'm really glad I did. It's enabled us to do more than we would have done had we stayed on the existing tract.
Was it the idea out of necessity, or just I think here's an opportunity?
I was increasingly dissatisfied with selling calves into the system. The business was profitable. We weren't making a lot of money, but I went back and looked, and I paid taxes every year. I graduated from the University of Georgia in 1976, and 20 years later, I changed the way I did business, and I made money every year, paid taxes every year. Again, didn't make a lot of money, but I had a paid-for farm, and we were pretty good at it, and it was okay. In the mid-90s, I changed, and I lost money for a while, and that wasn't much fun. But I'm glad I did it.
When you evolve and when you change, fourth generation cattleman, sixth generation on the farm, did every generation have a big evolution over the time with your family?
My dad certainly did. He's the one that moved it from slaughtering animals on the farm in a way that would be illegal today to being part of the industrial cow-calf system. Then I changed, and then of course I've got two grown daughters and their spouses in the business now, and they're active in the business. They're helping me run the business, and they may have other ideas. They really hadn't seen the stuff about the business of changing things yet, but they'll need to change. This economics will change, circumstances will change, markets will change. I've told them that I'm a cowman first and foremost and always. But if they reach the point that they need to sell the cows. I would hate it, but that could happen. My cow herd goes back to the cracker cattle my great granddad brought here in 1866, and these are the descendants of them. They don't look like that anymore. We've brought other genetics in, but if the cattle my cattle business was not working economically, I wouldn't do it anymore. I couldn't do it anymore.
I know genetics is a big part of seed, and I know it's an incredible amount about livestock. But tell me why or how your genetics is both an identity for you, but also I guess a thing to literally hang your hat on why your farm is different.
Well, it's changed a lot. We'll just talk about cattle because that's what I've been in the longest. I told you that my great grandfather brought cracker cattle here. Somebody, I don't know if it was my dad or granddad, probably granddad, started buying purebred bulls to improve the herd, and did. My dad certainly did, and I certainly did, and it was kind of the flavor of the month club. Go to the bull sale, and so I've never seen one like that before. What is that? And wound up buying 3 or 4 of them, bringing them home, and putting those genetics in the herd. So, in an effort to improve the demand for the beef from my herd, we did that. We mongrelized the herd, and that's okay. I mean, it's not that bad. I mean, I don't begrudge that. But about 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, I closed the herd back. I went back to what my great-grandfather did, and with as many cows as we got, I think I can do that without interbreeding being a problem. I think I can. Not sure. I think I can. But we've always saved heifers, but I started saving bulls, and I really like what it's done. I raise 600-700 bulls a year, and I'm able to pick the 20 or 30 or 40. I put a bull to 20 cows. I really overdo it, but I'm able to pick the best of the best. And, my cattle are not fancy, but they fit this environment and they perform well. And I really love what's happening since I closed the herd.
And so they're adaptive to your area, so they might not be the same to ship down the road to the next to finish like your ancestors did somewhere else. Take them off the farm. They might not. It might not have the same reaction that you're getting.
You're exactly right.
Okay.
And in fact, we started a nonprofit, a 501c3, 6-8 years ago. Now, if time doesn't mean much to me. If I tell you 6-8, I don't really know how many it was, but it was a while back. We started a nonprofit. It's called CFAR, Center for Agricultural Resilience. We bring people here, and it's a nonprofit. We put on training sessions for them. And they always want to get into long discussions about breeds and that sort of thing. And I cut them short. I said, don't, please don't worry too much about that. I know I'll offend some Angus and Hereford and Charolais and Limousin people, but I said, don't worry about that. Find you a good cattleman, an established good cattleman in your ecosystem, as close as you can, and tell them you want to buy X heifers per year from them, and whatever you can stand, however fast you want to grow, and you want to buy the best ones they're willing to sell you. They're gonna keep the best ones, but you want the second best. And that's the way I urge people to get in the business in terms of breed.
You're not alone in that. Several years ago, we did a story on a guy. In fact, he used to be on our show a lot. I always talk about Walt Hackney. This was 20 years ago, I think 15 years ago. He started in Montana a group that was very, very similar to what you're talking about. They narrowed the genetics to a certain point that they knew what they wanted, and that's how the 10 or 20 farmer ranchers in that area, they went into that with that same genetics because, again, both climate and the way that herd is. So I want to pivot, if I could, for a moment I want to go back to the thing you said about your area. It is dry. It has been dry. How do your cattle perform in dry conditions?
Well, so first of all, I should tell you that we get 52 inches of rain a year here in the coastal plain of Georgia. And we get dry sometimes, but we get 52 inches of rain a year, and that's more than most people get. And it comes fairly evenly through the year. We have May and October, historically, are our two driest months. That's the changing of the seasons. And, when we have those dry months, we've always been able to feed our way through them. We have some really good haying relationships with a couple of plants. They have water, the wastewater that goes out in irrigation. There's a word for it. Land application permits, I think is the word. And so we're able to roll that hay cheaper than most people are rolling hay here. And we feed our way through it. Now, that I'm not saying everybody ought to do that. That's what works for me. I get amused listening to consultants, cattle consultants, talking about the optimum carrying capacity of your land. Well, when? I mean, and so I think that a cattleman who has permanence has to make some decisions. And the decision I made is that I'm going to have my stocking rate on the high side of what my farm will carry. And then I'll feed my way through time. Now, I'm not saying everybody should do that. I'm saying that's what works for me here in Southwest Georgia with some really good haying relationships on the side. When I hear consultants talk about the optimum carrying capacity, it's all over the board. We have a lot of advantages here. A disadvantage is we don't do standing hay very well. If we try to grow hay in the growing season and let it stand, by the time the cows get to it, we've had so much rain on it, we've leached all the goody out of it. So that standing hay doesn't work for us. It works beautifully in some places. I've seen it. I've seen it, and I was jealous of it. Every ecosystem has some advantages and it has some disadvantages. And if you're going to be successful, you better figure out what your advantages are and use them, and figure out what your disadvantages are and devise some way of handling it.
Your numbers say, and your approach is a small group of a smaller operation. Is it duplicatable? Can you duplicate it? I guess I should use an actual word. Could somebody duplicate it a state or two or three over exactly the way you do it? Or is it back to the genetics of the animal have to fit the land where they're being grown? I mean, I guess are those two at all tied together?
I think what we do here is highly replicatable, but not highly scalable. I think that there's a limit to what we should do. As far as emulating it in other ecosystems, I see that as a mistake. And I see that as, I see people do it all the time. One of the, again, I'm a product of the Land Grant University College of Agriculture. And, we would have genetics professors, PhDs, 50, 60 years old, whatever. And they were experts in genetics, or they were experts in nutrition, or they were experts in reproduction, or they were experts in ... And those guys were truly experts. I mean, they could go, you'll say, more and more about less and less. And they knew so much about reproduction or whatever, nutrition, whatever their field was. They could go anywhere on the planet, I guess, certainly in the country, and teach that subject. But I don't think they were good at adapting their subject to the ecosystem. And I have a very opposite view in terms of my education and the education of my employees. I don't want to know too much about anything. I don't want to know a little bit about everything. And, I have a dear friend who's a holistic producer like we are. And he when he gets started talking about mycorrhizal, how you say it?
Microbial.
Yeah. He can just on and on and on. And I have to make him be quiet because I don't want to know that much. I don't want to know that much about it. I mean, I believe everything he says. I don't need to know that much about it. I know, a little bit about everything, but I don't think you can know enough about everything, and I think it could do you harm. I used to play a little game. I don't do it anymore. I finally matured beyond it, but I would have specialists come to my farm, and I would show them a problem in the pasture, and I would say, "What do you think this is?" Give me a genuine problem. And if they were a nutritionist, they would get back to nutrition. If they were a fertility specialist, they would get back to what's in the soil. If they were a genetic specialist, it would be the breeding. And it was just always interesting to me how they would diagnose any problem based on their very in-depth knowledge on that subject. I don't want to know too much about any of it. I want to know a little bit about all of it.
Well, one of the things that we could talk about, and we'd probably spend another few hours, what you're saying, if I'm picking it up here, Will, you make it sound like that agriculture has a little bit of a complex to it, the industrial complex. It's like the chemicals. We have to do this chemical chased by this fertilizer, chased by this seed to get this crop so it looks like here. As a farmer in Ohio told me a few years ago, he called it the treadmill. Agriculture can be on a treadmill. And it sounds like you're off that treadmill.
I'm way off of it. We talk here about complex and complicated, and this farm is complex. It is super complex. Everything impacts everything else. But we have, for years, we tried to run it as though it was a complicated system. Complicated is linear. Complex is cyclical, and it's very, very different. And there are, if you were trying to build this computer, that is a very complicated system. To set up a farm, a functional farm, is very complex. And I think that the guy that can do one probably is not going to do very good at the other.
Even though those words are so close, they are entirely different. And it's the same for you on a farm.
And I think they're often misplaced. I mean, I think we use when we're talking about one complex and we call it complicated and vice versa. I think that a good starting place is figure out what is complicated and what is complex, and be sure you're prepared to approach it in a proper manner.
Can agriculture get off of, should it get off of that treadmill and be more individualized and not a conglomerate and similar?
We certainly did. And I think that, and we're certainly better off for doing it. And I think that farmers who don't probably will pay the consequence sooner or later. I think that since my dad industrialized this farm post World War II, the space that he lived in, raising calves and shipping them, was pretty good, and he did well. I think that space economically has tightened and tightened and tightened and tightened until it's not much fun anymore. And we got 4 big packers in this country that are doing what, 80%. I don't know what the number is. I think it's about right.
It's about right.
We're the cattleman out here in the field raising calves we've worked ourselves into a position where we can just be squeezed so easy and so hard. And I think that's why the cow numbers in this country are lower than they've been since World War II. Is that about right? The 50s maybe. I think that, and cows are record high, but the numbers are not going up much. And I think it's because of that situation I've said, and people have just been squeezed to the point that they don't want to do it anymore. And guys my age were raised watching westerns on TV, and I would deny. We sort of romanticized what we did, and we didn't make much money. We still act like we're doing what we're doing, but raising cattle is a incredibly capital intensive business. Land, equipment, herd, etc. The gestation period is still 283 days. I don't care what you do, it's 283 days, and then you won't have a marketable product for 2 years after that, an edible marketable product. So I think it's just become easier and easier for subsequent generations to say, I'm just not going to do it anymore. I'm just not going to do it. And the demand for land, non-producer demand for land. And I'm not talking about data centers. I'm talking about and I'm not talking about Bill Gates. I'm just talking about people that have got a lot of liquidity and want to put it in land. That is really, I worry a lot about that.
Well, and that, again, another 3 hours, we'll have that problem talked through. But I want to wrap up here, I could, Will. Let's talk cattle for a minute in the industry that it is that's making the headlines right now in 2026. It's because of a small herd, high prices, there is drought, there is lowest herd numbers, like we said, since the 50s. And it takes a long time to rebuild, but it's hard not to sell something that's profitable into the system right now if you have it. This is going to be a little while, right? Before this stabilizes and the consumer doesn't have to hear the sad headlines of high prices in beef, right? This is not going to happen this is not going to get solved anytime soon, is it?
I'm amazed that we hadn't opened the borders for importation of beef. And I know the screw fly in Mexico. That's not what I'm talking about. But there's still a lot of countries in the world, South America, Australia, New Zealand, Uruguay, that have beef, and I think the market's pretty high there, but it's not as high as it is here. And I'm surprised that we hadn't seen a lot more. I'm not advocating for it. We're just talking about what is. I'm surprised we hadn't seen more of that than we have, and I don't know. I'm not enough of a political student to know why it is. I don't follow that. But I fully expect sooner or later our politicians to get intimidated enough by consumer dissatisfaction that they find a way to bring the price down. And sadly, when that happens, it doesn't usually ease down. It falls like a rock. And I don't know enough about the international economy supply to know why that hadn't happened or when it's going to happen, but historically that's what happens. I can't imagine politicians telling consumers, just wait 283 days and then 2 more years and it'll all be fine.
You've heard that before, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. So I don't have a crystal ball, but I'm just responding to your question.
Well, and you could say the cattle market is a tire right now, and if certain things happen politically, that tire could run into a chainsaw versus running over a thumbtack or a small nail and slowly let the air out of it. That stability would slowly land us somewhere differently. But from what I'm hearing, you make it sound like it's possible we could hit a chainsaw and that tire goes flat instantly.
Of course, I'm just speculating.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is what I do know is that even with these record high prices, we don't see expansion blowing up in this country. I think that's very telling. I don't know. Maybe we may never get back to where we have been in terms of producing beef, live cattle in this country. Money doesn't seem to make it come back. They're certainly high enough to incentivize expansion.
Is there one reason why it hasn't ticked the other way? We haven't expanded. Do you see one?
Well, I mean, the things we've said, and if you are, let's just say you sold some business somewhere and you had a lot of cash and you want to go in the cattle business. By the time you buy land, improve it so that it's a reasonable cattle operation, buy brood stock, and get it all started, and forget fencing and equipment and wild cattle are higher than they've ever been. They may not be all that high. I mean, it may not be high. Clearly, it's not high enough to incentivize people to do these things I just said.
Yeah. No one's had a good answer to it for quite a while. We talked about the industrial side. We didn't quite get into the regenerative side. Do you want to quickly walk me through some of the regenerative practices that you're doing?
Well, I think it's important. I think what we do is try to understand and respect the cycles of nature. The cycles of nature are the water cycle, the mineral cycle, the animal breeding cycle, the microbial cycle, on and on. Dozens, maybe hundreds of cycles that are occurring in nature all the time if man doesn't interrupt it. And when those cycles occur unimpeded, it generates an abundance. All that oil and coal and gas in the ground we've been living on the last 80 or 90 years, that was the abundance of nature in the era of the dinosaur. And that abundance it still occurs. It's just that we have disrupted it so badly with things like cultivation and pesticides and monocultural farming. No. So, and what we have done here is, I mean, my land has gone from, I used to farm it very industrially. It's gone from 0.5% organic matter to 5.5% organic matter. It took 20-something years to do it. If land that is 1% organic matter will absorb about an inch of rain. That's about 27,000 gallons per acre. If you got 5% organic matter, it'll hold 5 inches of rain. The productivity is way better. And I can go on and on about that. So I think that ceasing to do the practices that are damaging to nature. Our emulation of nature is imperfect. It's imperfect, but it's pretty good. As good as I know how to do it. And I have seen with my own eyes that the productivity goes up, and the cost of many of the costs of doing it go down. Not all, but some. The gestation period is still 283 days.
That's right. That hasn't changed, not since your days. That answer from your professors at the University of Georgia has not changed since you graduated. They haven't made an evolution there.
It's just it's just incredible, and I don't mean to just rag out land grant universities. I really don't, but they get a lot of their funding from big ag, big tech, and big food, and whoever else, and it has impacted what we teach our children, what we teach our college students.
When the department chair's salary comes from one of the big food companies or the big it's hard not to look at it objectively. The information and the research is, I think, what you're saying, and there's plenty of people that agree with you.
When you know that, you know all you need to know.
Well, I appreciate it. It's so good to get to talk to you. I've been following you for a little while, and glad we were able to have a conversation. Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. You're a good interviewer.
We are produced at Iowa PBS. Our production supervisor is Sean Ingracia. His crew is Reed Denker, Kevin Rivers, Julie Knudsen, Neil Kyer, and David Feingold. The executive producer of Market to Market is David Miller. I'm Paul Yeager. We'll see you next time.